distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, friends and enemies.
Welcome to this week's episode of Make It Plain. Thanks for listening, thanks for the support. If you're listening online or on podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, please do like and subscribe. All the support, very helpful. Alright, this week I have an interview with Professor Robyn C. Spencer from the United States. She's currently a professor at Wayne State University as part of this Detroit Black Studies Center, which is a really important development that's happening over the next few years. And I wanted to interview Robyn because she wrote this book a few years ago, I think 2016 now, that it came out, called The Revolution Has Come, and it's all about black women in the Oakland Panther Party. And one of the things which came out from this book was that 50%, more than 50%, the majority of people in the Black Panther Party in Oakland were women, right? Now we remember the Panthers as this male, bad niggas with guns, kind of attack, shoot as the police. But that really wasn't what the Panthers were. The Panthers were community service, the Panthers were patrolling the police, the Panthers were armed, women and men. There's a much more interesting history of the Black Panther Party. And like most things in black politics, anybody who's involved in black politics will tell you is mostly black women, right? So we have this really bad way of remembering the past, which takes out all the women that were present, highlights the very problematic men, and then we criticize that. And then we criticize those organizations without actually understanding what they really were, right? So The Revolution Has Come, really important, powerful book. Robyn also wrote a book called Build the World Anew, which is about the connection between the black liberation struggle and the anti-Vietnam war struggle. So we do talk about that, and we talk about that in the context of black people mobilizing for Palestine as well, and those connections that go across. And we also spoke about a project that she's doing around an archive for Patricia M. Robinson, who was a black left theorist who, to be honest, until I started, I didn't know much about Patricia M. Robinson until I started doing the research for this interview. So do all that's in there. Please do tap into that interview. Really good discussion I had, and that's after the break. Before that, start with an update. I'm very tired because I just drove back from Lille in France. Yesterday, from where we are now, it was yesterday. I went and took my sons very much into basketball. I'm also very much into basketball. And I didn't really realize that Olympic basketball is in Lille, and in the UK, it's only about an hour 20 minutes from once you get to France. So if you can get all the way to Dover, and it's a bit of a far drive because I live in Birmingham, but if you can get there, jump on a ferry, it's only an hour and a half to get to Lille. So I just thought, you know what, let's try and go, take the kids down. Found some tickets to Team USA Women, which is actually good because my sons, I don't know where they get this women can't do sports things from. It definitely ain't me. My first live basketball game to go watch was actually WNBA. So I was like, no, let's go see the women play. And let's go see a masterclass of Team USA Women, who, by the way, have not lost a game, not just won all the Olympics. They haven't lost a game at the Olympics. Touch wood, because when I'm recording this and when you hear this, they may have lost a game. But up until the point I'm talking there, Team USA Women had not lost a game at the Olympics since 1992. That's a long time. That's a long time as winning all the games. And so we went down, we saw them play Japan. Started off close for like 2 minutes. Then it was a blowout. Not really a surprise. And they got to see Asia Wilson, who I'd seen before in Northern WNBA, and she dominated. So now they have a new favorite basketball player. It's a woman. This is great. Expanding their understanding of what basketball is, because they love basketball, love the NBA, and now hopefully also they'll start to get into the WNBA as well. Driving to France was long and interesting. I mean, France, you weren't there for that long, but even though you're not there for that long, you always hear about France. And I spend a lot of time in France. Of all the countries, I don't tend to get invited to France because France don't like to talk about race. So France is one of those countries that pretends that racism doesn't exist, right? They have what we call an assimilationist policy, where look, if you're a French colony, you're French. If you're French, you're French. And so they don't really accept the idea that there's difference. Contrast to the UK, where in the UK we had something called multiculturalism, which was this idea of communities. So there's an acceptance that you're Black British, Black French does not have that same acceptance. It never has, right? They try to turn the colonial people into French people, right? This is why people like Frantz Fanon, when he writes the book Black Skin, White Masks, he says the West Indian, he's talking about the French West Indian, was a white man, right? Because they literally bleach you all the way. And it's this idea that you become French. Think about someone like Toussaint Louverture. Perfect example of this. Toussaint Louverture, who we celebrate for the Haitian Revolution. Really, really important in organising and fighting back, kicking at the French, beating the Spanish, beating the British, etc. But actually Toussaint didn't finish the revolution. And why did Toussaint not finish the revolution? Because he thought he was French. Like, he really was trying to negotiate with the French. He actually took himself into the hands of the French to negotiate, and they arrested him and put him on a boat to Paris and had him killed. And he died in custody, right? Because he was so French. Because they literally, even the revolutionaries got bleached down to their soul. So that's France, right? And so going into France, it's a different. That's why I don't get invited too much to go, because obviously blackness. They don't really talk about that too tough. Or accept that. And in most European countries actually don't collect data on race. Race as a category isn't seen to be a proper thing. So they don't even collect the data. Crazy for many reasons. I'm kind of digressing, but I suppose it's important context. But like when Britain was in the European Union, we had more of an impact, I think. But like I was a long time ago, a few years ago now, 2018, I was on a report called Being Black in Europe. And the only way they could define black in the European context was if you had a grandparent who was from the Caribbean or Africa, right? Because most countries don't collect data. So when, not like in the UK, we're very clear, give you all the statistics. It's just not there. And that's still the case, right? So you have whole generations of people whose grandparents are born in France or born in Europe and they don't count as black, right? So that's the invisibility that you get. And as I said before, when talking about going to Holland, it does feel like going back in time sometimes, going into Europe. Now, I wasn't really in France that lot this time. It was very much a go see the game, come back, etc. We did stop in Calais and seeing the way, just in like a McDonald's, but these kids came in, I think they went to the toilet, and the woman was so rude and dismissive to them. It's like, oh wow, okay, I can see this. I can understand what that is like to be here in this country, and then also not really having the language or the tools in many ways to resist, because you don't have the data, right? Everything we know about France, everyone know our French colleagues tell us that France is probably worse in many ways in terms of the inequalities, but we just don't have the data to back it up because it's not collected. So yeah, France is an interesting place, a place I'd probably like to spend more time in and to see. But like I said, this was just a quick in and out visit. I was gonna go when we were picking a game to go see. I was thinking about going to see South Sudan. South Sudan were playing Serbia, and South Sudan against Serbia might seem a little bit obscure, but Serbia has, potentially the best basketball player alive right now in Nikola Jokic. The black nationalist in me, it's difficult to say the white guy's the best basketball player alive, but he's definitely very good, right? And South Sudan, I was interested in South Sudan. South Sudan, newest country in the world, very black, right? This is what happens after, because South Sudan seeds from Sudan, and after the lots of war, strife, etc., and now South Sudan has its own country, its own basketball team, etc. They pushed the men, Team USA men, to almost beat them. Probably should have beaten them actually when they were in London. And South Sudan male basketball team just became the first African basketball team to win a game at the Olympics since 1996. Right, doing really well. And big up to Liu Odeng there. Who Liu Odeng is to represent Team GB. Team GB in the UK, basketball don't get the proper investment. It's a real shame. There's lots and lots of talent. Actually, my kids all play youth basketball, and there's loads and loads of talent, but there's just not the investment, unfortunately, in the sport to make it a big sport. There's no representation in basketball. I'm sure I read that they didn't even bother to put Team GB into the qualifiers. I mean, it really is quite bad. Which does actually, thinking about sports, Olympics, what does get funding is really interesting. So like basketball is, I believe, the second most popular sport in the UK, played largely by black and brown people, largely in inner cities, very, 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 very popular sport, gets a fraction, just doesn't get the support, doesn't get the investment, even though it's this massive grassroots thing, doesn't get the investment from the Olympics. What does get the investment? I'm just sitting there listening to Team GB's one in, what were they running? Was it, I want to say biathlon, but it could be someone running on the road and swimming, diving, shooting. What am I, late wife Nicole called it, horsey jumping. There's a lot of these white sports, rowing, of course rowing. You love the rowing. There's a lot of these white sports which are minimal participation sports because of the infrastructure it takes, because of the money it takes, etc. Minimal participation sports, which are getting lots and lots and lots of money, investment, and they say it's all about trying to get medals. We can get medals, it's great, we can get medals, whereas the second most popular sport in the country, most black and brown people played it in the city, gets minimal investment. Right? There's such, I mean, watching the Olympics, there's such, I mean, generally speaking, you watch the Olympics, there's just this massive racial dynamic. Is it coincidental that me and my black kids went to go see basketball? Probably not, right? Handball was also taking place in the same arena. Probably not going to go see handball, never see the handball game. Like I said, shooting, horsey jumping, archery, all that. Like, it's interesting, but you can see the difference. I just watch the sports. You can just tune into the sports and see the difference. Swimming, swimming, you can just see the difference. It's really this really microcosm of what happens in society, right? You can see it play out with these elite, so-called elite sports versus the mass participation sports versus the black sports, right? And the sports with the sports like basketball, athletics. I mean, actually no, I would say athletics. It's not even just athletics. It's certainly even within athletics. When athletics start, you'll see there's different things, right? The running races, run nigga run. Black people are sprinting. Long distance tends to be East Africans, not even West Africans. When you got your throwing sports and those shot put stuff and that. This isn't like, I remember there was a show, what was it? It's that guy, Michael Johnson, American sprinter, who did this. Why is it that all black people, that sprinting races of black people just dominated by black people? And, you know, he actually gave credence to this idea that it's somehow genetically linked to what did Chris Rock call it in a movie, Longest Yard? He called it slave feet. We got slave feet because we were taken and bred to be slaves, and now we're faster. This is nonsense, by the way. There is literally no evidence to suggest or support this at all. It's largely about what are people pushed into rather than what are they not pushed into. Where is the investment rather than where is not the investment. And a big example of this would be thinking about one of the big Diaspora wars in the Olympics, which became a Diaspora war because in the sprinting, 100 meters, 200 meters, less extent 400 meters, but 100, 200, when you had Usain Bolt, Shelley-Ann Fraser-Price, Jamaicans winning everything, Jamaicans breaking all the world records, this became a thing. Because before that it was black Americans, African Americans running things, and then Jamaicans came up and just smashed it. Usain Bolt smashed the records, etc., etc. Now, both of them descended from the enslaved, so you could say slave feet, right? No, how do you explain Jamaica having so many sprinters? It's not because of slavery, it's because of investment. It's because it's a national sport. It's because there's so much money went into it and time. And why did basketball become a black game? Because originally there were no black people in basketball. It became the sport that got associated with black people. People got pushed into it, etc., 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 etc. So actually, it's more about when you're watching the Olympics and seeing these differences. Like, if black people could swim, black people would be really good swimming. If black people were not could swim, black people were given the emphasis, the pushing into swimming. Guess what? There'd be black people swimming. Right? It's not because we can't swim, because we're not genetically predisposed to swimming. It's because we're just not in infrastructure. We're not given that support to do it. Right? So this is what you see when you're looking at the Olympics. You're seeing where are people pushed. What does that do? What does that mean, etc., etc. And there really is this idea, particularly in the Olympics, you can see play out that the physical running grunt side of it is the black people, and the thinking, shooting, archery, those kind of things are not, and it's not a complete separation. Rowing is obviously a very, 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 very physical task, right? But attached to the elite, etc. So it's not clearly black and white all the time in terms of physical, non-physical. But what is impossible to miss when you're watching the Olympics is the racial dynamics. There are some sports that there's none of us, and there's some sports where it's just bare black people, all right? Which is showing you something, and I think it's interesting to watch, and it's interesting to see how those dynamics play out, and also what do those dynamics mean. The question I wanted to get to for this intro was thinking about, well, one of the Diaspora wars is interesting, right? So when you have black dominated stuff, right, and it is like sprinting is a perfect example. and I was listening to a podcast called Higher Learning, and Van Lathan's on there saying, "Oh, it's he just want, even though he appreciated Bolt as an African American, he wanted an African American to win, right? And now Jamaicans are kind of is dying, sliding down again, and it's going to be an American win. He's happy, right? That's the perfect kind of Diaspora awards. I mean, Shelly Ann Fraser-Price is retiring after this is the last Olympics, and this should be a moment where, we're all saying, look, but he's like, nah, she's Jamaican, I don't care, this is good, makes more space for African Americans. We've got to be thinking about this whole thing about the Olympics and patriotism. Right, like this is one place where you will see bare flags, British flags draped on people, running in the flag, draped in the flag, American, yeah, greatest country in the world, all this. We really do, as much as on the one hand, it is a space where you're watching it and you just kind of want a black person to win, right? But if it's all black people, you want your black person to win, right? Like if it's everybody black, so I want a Jamaican to win, I want a British person to win, etc., etc. And it is one of these places where, strange enough, African Americans is slightly different because African Americans do love to be African American, and there's this kind of big American thing. But with British, there's not so much of that British pride. I don't think we still have Jamaican pride or like Nigerian pride or Ghanaian pride, etc., etc. But it does seem to be a time when there is this more British pride, or we want to see Britain. And I do wonder, is this because we're embracing Britain, or is it because of something else? Because even if you look at the coverage, if I Google now Olympics, it's just going to tell me Britain did this, Britain did that. If I turn it on, it's Britain did this, Britain did that. So there's a kind of propaganda that's kind of getting us to think Britain, and not think blah, 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 blah. All right? And sports is really one of those ways to do it. Insidious, in kind of an insidious, undercover way, we kind of get dragged into the national projects through sport. Sports are perfect. Olympics is the perfect example of that, where we start to shroud ourselves in this dirty, stinky country because we're told it gives us a pride to see Britain on the middle table. And it's just, but it's all the time. You see it all the time. This is how the Olympics are given to us. Is they're given to us in this way that we should be prideful of it, etc., etc. And look, if you're proud of the Olympics, go ahead. I check the middle table and say, oh, how many goals does Britain have, etc., etc. But it's not coincidental. I will say that. And I also say, look at the racial politics of the Olympics. You can see something that is not equal. I used to have a big picture of Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the 68 games with the Black Power Fist, and it fell off my wall and broke, unfortunately. But that's the perfect image of how the Olympics are terrible. We kind of remember that picture, and we're like, oh, that's a really powerful picture. But after that, they got kicked out of the Olympic Village, they got stripped of their medals. It was I can't remember the guy's name, the white guy that ran the Olympics. Was he a Nazi sympathizer or something? It was really bad. I'm trying, his name is coming back to me, but they literally, this is the Olympic Games that was hosted in 1936 by the Nazis. The Nazis actually hosted the Olympic Games, and you're supposed to believe that this is a thing that's brings them all together, isn't it? Oh, great! Isn't it? Come on. I hate to be the party people here. Olympics is terrible. Many ways you can see, and that iconic image of the Black Power Fist at the Olympics is something that we like to celebrate, but it's also something that tells us the problem of the Olympics, right? What happens to them afterwards? This mirage of this all wonderful, all coming together. This mirage of isn't this great sports, a great healer. It's a mirage, right? That's the only thing you can use. It's a mirage. That is not a real moment that we're having, right? When you're having that in the Olympic space. So anyway, what am I doing today? I'm just throwing cold water on things, pouring on it makes it terrible. That's not really what it was. I actually said enjoy the Olympics, watch the Olympics, have fun, get engaged in all the Diaspora wars, etc., etc., etc. But remember what we do. Like things can be fun, and things can just be light, and things can just be sport, and you can just enjoy it. But also just deep what's happening. Deep down, what's happening. And my number one recommendation is just want the black people to win. That's why I really wanted to go see South Sudan, because I was really looking forward to go see South Sudan, but the tickets are too expensive, unfortunately. Anyway, so I have written down for long enough. And after the break, we're going to have the interview with Robyn C. Spencer. Really great interview talking about Revolution Has Come, a book on black politics and Vietnam, thinking about Gaza, and also check out Patricia M. Robinson archive as well. Have a good one. Welcome to the podcast. We've got Professor Robyn Spencer here. I read your first book a while ago. Revolution Has Come, about women in the Black Panther Party. And when you write a book that good, I know that's like 8 years ago, 2016 it came out, right?
Yeah, 2016. It's been a minute.
Yeah, but when you write a book that good, people will ask you about it for a long time. So I do want to ask you about your new stuff, but I have to ask you about the classic as well. And your new stuff will be classics too. So, yeah, just think about why did you write the book Revolution Has Come?
Well, thanks for asking, and thanks for, I feel like, I enjoy books despite whenever their birthday was, right? So I do hope the book continues to be relevant to especially movements, and of course, people who are trying to teach and trying to learn. I wrote the book, I conceived the book many years before it was born. At that point, there wasn't a lot of research on the Black Panther Party or women and Black power. And I really felt like there was something that was being missed in terms of how we understood the political evolution of Black radicalism in the 60s. People would talk about the Panthers, but they never talked about them in a way that was textured or gave all of the nuances that I felt were important to understand. Like, what did it mean to be a member? What did you do every day? Why did you do what you did? What did your people think about what you did? What were some of the challenges that you faced becoming this revolutionary person? And of course, what was the impact of the state and the police on the possibilities and the horizons that you could achieve as an activist? And what did this all mean if you were a Black woman? So those were some of the questions that motivated me. And I just sort of started out with the idea that I was going to answer some of those questions. And I also felt it was important to write in a way that would be, just accessible to anyone who wanted to pick it up and read, not a specialist or anything like that.
Yeah, it's an excellent book. One thing that surprised me, I guess, is the majority of the Black Panther Party were women, right? Particularly in Oakland, it was mostly a female party, which isn't the image that we get of the Panthers, right?
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, we oftentimes don't even imagine what kind of image or body that we see, but we know for sure it's not a woman, right?
Yeah.
So to actually put women into those roles and also to put women into the Panthers political world, I think just open up what people saw them potentially doing, right? So when we're looking at what the Panthers did, we have the marches, we have the protests, we have the rallies, we have the armed self-defense, we have the political trials, but we also have the community work, we have the voter registration, we have all of the other things that they did. And women were involved at all levels. It wasn't just that the women did kind of the domestic political stuff and the men did the other things. It was really great to put women in all of those roles and also to put men in all of those roles too. Men as caregivers, caretakers, as part of their revolutionary contribution to the movement. I felt like that's something I felt really passionately about, just bringing out about people's true experiences.
Why do you think the image, well, the dominant image is a bad brothers off the block, right? Or the bad nigger off the block. You think about police shootouts, you think about very male. The party has a reputation of being deeply misogynistic, which is partly true as well.
Definitely.
But why do you think we've kind of erased black women from the picture of the party?
Well, I think it's several things. One, you have to say it's a purposeful act because there's so many pictures of women. There are women in the artwork of Emory Douglas. Women were everywhere. We can't even say women were hidden somewhere and I discovered them. No, women were actually everywhere. Just why did we refuse to see them? Right, is the question. I think it has to do with the Panther stance as a militant organization, their commitment to armed self-defense, to protecting the community. And in the traditional kind of masculinist parlance, the men are protectors and the women and children are the ones that need protecting. So seeing Panther women in roles that sort of took on this question of protection and even expanded what it means to sort of protect the community and take that into different spaces. I think that's one of the reasons why women in the organization were just not seen. I think also the reality was is that even the state, when seeing the Panthers as a threat, and focusing on the many different ways they were a threat, not just in terms of their armed self defense political stance, but also because of their deep popularity, their ability to weave themselves into and gain support of a broad variety of political and social actors, their alliances internationally, as well as across movements. That all those reasons are why they were a threat. And the state also sort of had a refusal of seeing women in that key role. Although, of course, later on we know that women were attacked by COINTELPRO and the FBI and were arrested as part of the Panther 21 and other things like that. So, those are some of the reasons why I think that women's presence has not been as as analyzed. I think it's been accepted, but it hasn't been analyzed. And I even found that in the initial stages of the organization, you have community women, you have partners of, wives of, who are all contributing to the movement. You have Kathleen Cleaver joining the organization and becoming the communications secretary, which played such a key role in organizing on the ground. But the word secretary now seemed to position her in our contemporary minds in a particular secondary kind of role, whereas she was coming from SNCC, where field secretaries and all sorts of secretaries were on the front lines along with anyone else.
Yeah, secretaries are one of the most important roles. You have this
Yes.
problem now with organizing. When you say secretary, people think like I don't know. They get that dominant idea of what a secretary is. Typing, doing women's work, and not actually seeing. No, no, secretary is like the most one of the most important, maybe the most important role in the
Yes, I
organization.
mean that's one thing I found is just. I mean, I have to say the story of when I first went to the Huey Newton Foundation archives at Stanford University, and I was just amazed by the level of paperwork. I didn't expect that. I think people don't expect that out of these organizations, that they were actually organized and, deeply so. And so to see that you could write a letter to the Black Panther Party and someone would write you back, that they had letterhead, that they were minutes that they kept from their meetings, that if you were doing political work, you had to fill out a daily work report, that there were rules that you had to follow, that there was all sorts of bureaucracy, that really legitimatized and sort of shore up the bureaucratic foundations of this organization. That felt very important to me for people to know, because I think there's the assumption that to be a member of the Black Panther Party meant you were kind of disorganized, kind of undisciplined, and kind of just like a stylish, flashy
Yeah,
um, person, that you were not disciplined. And I think many people were tremendously disciplined. High school age people, college age people were incredibly disciplined and made incredible sacrifices.
yeah. I think that to be honest, having been organizing, one of the things people get attracted by the romance, the idea of it, the protest. But actually, it's just mostly like paperwork, right? Paperwork,
I
organizing,
mean,
mundane stuff,
listen,
right?
anyone who's ever organized anything knows that half of the battle, if not more, is what you have to do to mobilize people and how you have to show up so that people trust that they can follow. They can co-create alongside of you because you have your stuff together. You're going to
Yeah.
respond. Someone's going to pick up the phone. Someone's going to follow up. And the Panthers had that. And I think, that is one of the stories I wanted to tell in the book.
Yeah. So there's most of the organization's women, but there was a big problem with misogyny in the party.
Yes.
And the question that was it Kimberly Crenshaw asked me once. She said, "Well, just because women are there, does that mean they really changed it?" So, did you
Hmm.
think women had an actual impact on the party?
Yes, thank you for asking. That's a great commentary because, yeah, I mean, there were very few organizations that Black women were part of in the 1960s and 70s that where they did not have to fight against ideals about what their particular role and place would be. and not always coming from men, right? Women also had those ideals about what women's roles should be, and being secondary and being auxiliary, and all of that. So yeah, Panther Women were not only there though, they actually changed the organization. I mean, there's so much evidence for that, from mothering, right? Putting political parenthood on the table at a time. And one of the greatest things I always like to say about the Panthers is that, of course, they were in a context, right? So they were engaging and with all of these ideas at the same time that many other people, political people, were doing the exact same thing. So we're talking about the time where in the feminist movement you have debates over free daycare, who's going to pay, debates over wages for housework. All of those things were happening around the Black Panther Party. So when Black Panther Party women said, hey, we need to do something to support political parenting within this organization so that we can be the mothers and fathers that we want to be, right? That was a way that they changed what the scope of the organization was and did. Like, we need a school, we need healthcare. Like, some of those community programs, yes, were born out of the needs of poor communities around the country. But it's important to note that Panthers themselves were served by some of those programs, and were served those programs, and those programs served them. So the Oakland Community School, what became the Oakland Community School, came out of the idea of Panthers wanting to educate their children in a particular way and expanding that to include the community. So, larger questions of how are we going to manage birth control in this social movement when the world around us is debating monogamy, debating what kind of marriages are right? Is marriage itself as an institution right? Political, apolitical? How do we understand love in this context? I mean, people who joined the Panthers were young people, right? At a time in life where they're finding relationships, becoming sexually active in the context of birth control options are that, that a generation before just simply did not have, right? So Panther Women put birth control on the agenda of the organization. It put taking care of children and creating a boarding like structure for children who were involved in the party on the table. And they also raised the question of, is it now too much? Like, how much do we give into an organization? I think in 2024 it's hard to imagine the type of lifestyle, like full-time life commitment that people gave to these organizations, which meant that, someone else was managing your time from sun up to sundown. And you accepted that discipline, you accepted those boundaries on what you could do because you felt it was for the larger good. You felt it was for the purpose of moving forward this revolution. It was out of love for the community. It was out of all of those factors, right? So Panther Women definitely played a role in sort of shaping the organization, shaping its policies as well. That does not mean that they did not engage in sometimes bitter and irreconcilable differences with their comrades, male and men and women around them who may have had more traditional ideals about that. They had to struggle against the question of what role did women play as sexual partners in movements? Were their bodies some kind of prize to be shared amongst the higher ups, the leaders? You know, lots of questions about sexuality and sex in this time period. And Panther Women, I think, were in the thick of it. They were definitely trying to push back. One of the things the Panthers had on their side that many organizations did not have was, of course, a written text that talked about how to treat women, that promised egalitarianism. Many organizations did not even promise, right? So women joined the Panthers with the ideal of, there's a text that we can try to actualize and make real, and they found allies in that struggle. But I can say that it remained, a struggle from beginning to end within the organization. I think that Black women have a long political tradition of this kind of dual struggle where you're trying to move ahead, with a broad vision and trying to impact structures of racism, imperialism, but then you find yourself also in a battle that maybe you didn't even feel you signed up for voice, for respect, for bodily autonomy, for all of those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think because it's been so because the misogyny was so much. I think in generally not just the Panthers, but not even just black organizations, just organizations for stuff. I've come across this. Some people have said this to me at least twice in conferences, and I had a reaction to it. But I'm going to say it to you and see what your reaction is. And that is that there has been no black organization that's ever focused on ever addressed the issues of black women.
Hmm.
I've heard that a few
Oh,
times. And I just wanted to say what you thought about that.
well, certainly that's not true for all of the black feminist organizations out there whose raison d'etre was like to address the needs and concerns of at least some black women, right? I would say that black women have had to fight in many of the organizations they found themselves in to center this idea of internal revolution. This idea that how we struggle is just as important as what we're struggling for.
Yeah,
And even in movements of today, like the movement to free political prisoners, the movements, to free the land, anti-capitalist movements, anti-imperialist movements, within it, you always find an internal struggle around not just gender sometimes, but sexuality, around just the self determination, of peoples, and this idea of, well, what does freedom look like, for us as a people? And are we free if it's sort of predicated on the oppression of others? If we've evolved on one step, but then we're stepping on the backs of others, is that the true freedom that we are going for? So I have found like the Black Radical Congress, for example of an organization who had a mission and manifesto that talked about sexism, patriarchy, LGBTQ, transphobia, speaking out against transphobia, homophobia, all of that. So I feel like there have been organizations that have certainly in their core missions upon their founding tried to speak back to the internalized oppressions, the ways that they tie into structural oppressions as well.
yeah,
But it certainly has not been without struggle. It's the struggle within the struggle, as many people say and feel.
yeah.
And
I,
children, people don't talk about children. Just the idea of the Panthers trying to give children a voice, trying to politically analyze and assess that link between parent and child, right? That hierarchy. I think that's like an unexplored territory. And despite the fact that so many people in the organization were young people, I do think that that might have been one of their contributions to the movement as well. It's just this intergenerational, providing this intergenerational space.
yeah. One of the reasons I really appreciated your work, and Keisha Blaine wrote a book about women in the Garvey movement,
Hmm.
and even this from anyone who's been involved in black organization knows that it's mostly women. Like it's not just like women weren't just there; it tends to be underground, and we kind of remember the men and high profile figures, etc. And I think that historiography that says actually no, look, this is really important to really understand and appreciate the contributions of black women. I think that
Yes.
bucks against a tendency to kind of say, well, look, the Panthers were misogynistic and we should just forget about them. I mean, in this moment, is there things we can learn, you think, as we go forward from an organization like the Black Panther Party?
I think so. The first thing to note is that our contemporary movements are still roiled with these debates. I do think that there's more of an awareness today around sexism and misogyny within movements, but then there's still also the production of those things. If we understand ourselves living in societies in which those processes are literally born within us and normalized around us, it becomes understandable why those same things show up when we come together to free Palestine or to, do something else. It's because that's our understanding of things. So when we even think about that kind of genocide and struggle, it's only a small percentage of us are thinking about, well, what does this mean for the women in particular in the moment? What does it mean for their body autonomy, for their, how are they experiencing sexual violence in this moment, et cetera? So all these questions, right, become part of the conversation anew. So the Panthers definitely have a lot to teach. Sometimes the teaching doesn't have to be a positive model. It could be a cautionary tale.
True.
Don't do this. Be
Yeah.
aware of that.
Yeah.
um, I think that learning about the Panthers for me is just so essential because they were an organization that were so, they were their own internal engine, right? They were able to organize people that many people felt could not be organized or would never be organized. They were able to have concrete impacts. They were able to think imaginatively about some of the issues. So yes, yes, they did voter registration, but I also want to say that they came together to try to rewrite the Constitution, and had something called the Revolutionary People's Constitutional Convention. That yes, they tried to connect themselves to revolutionaries from around the world and to actually travel the world and meet people on their own terrain and learn about struggle in different parts of the world, whether that be Vietnam, China, Africa, etc. So there's so much to learn from the Black Panthers because they were not, they had a broad vision of freedom. It wasn't unflawed for sure, but I do feel like now when sometimes the question of borders or revolution for whom and do we have time at this time of deep, intense, warfare against Black bodies in the U.S.? Do we have the time to look abroad? Right? Sometimes you'll get those questions. I feel like the Panthers give us a model of an organization that moved in a lot of different directions at once, for better or for worse. They were organized in particular ways. They were, when I say organized, I mean literally like to the chapter level, to the branch level.
Yeah.
I do feel like looking at their organizational structure seems like something essential to learn from, again, both in its pros and cons, in terms of democratic centralism and the ways in which they try to sort of harness a revolutionary force nationwide at a time where there were so many, the proliferation of so many smaller groups. They tried to do something bigger. And even later in their lives, when they tried to focus on Oakland, California, as part of a strategy for community control, one can say that there's so much to be learned about, well, can community control happen in one place? What stymied their attempts? How did political repression change as they changed, right? And did more things than the sort of on the ground, grassroots activism. So we learn about the FBI and COINTELPRO. We don't think about the IRS and all of the other ways in which they got enmeshed in, surveillance systems that eventually were their undoing. And of course, there's so much critical to be said about questions of leadership. I try to touch on that in the book, in terms of thinking about accountability for leaders. I think that's something that's very real right now. We're in a movement that is very intergenerational. And we do have to hold our elders, not just in respect and veneration, but also in accountability,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes we may be their leaders as well as they're being our leaders, right? Just to kind of understand all of that, because we're the moment where former Panthers are in the mix of many of, frontline. organizations, entities, and actions that are happening um, in the US, and even the political prisoner support movement, those kinds of things as well. So there's definitely, I think, a lot to learn. And when I say that with not just like a humble, this generation needs to learn from the past, but the sense that we have to also teach because it's a different world out here. Technologies of surveillance have changed. Technologies of connection have changed um, as well. There are different conservative ideologies that we're battling that were manifested differently than the Panthers faced in the '60s and '70s, and so the new generation has to deal with that. But the older generation has stuff to share, and not just Panthers, of course, people in SNCC and
Yeah.
um, even other radical formations as well, RAM.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you've talked about and comes across from the Panthers is that intercommunalism or internationalism. And your second book was about Vietnam, right? How black organizations and black politics really kind of coalesced around being anti-Vietnam as well. And I wonder, are there parallels to Palestine today? Because it seems like Palestine is a similarly black issue as Vietnam became a black issue.
Yes, I definitely see parallels. This larger question of solidarity is key. I think that you can look at '60s organizations and how they took on the question of Palestine in the late '60s through the mid 1970s, and just really get a sense of a broader element of Pan Africanism, a different way of kind of viewing the world and the role of the Black struggle in the US, and the possibilities that it had for transformation in alliance with others. I think there was also the sense of learning. I love to emphasize that there was so much education going on in the '60s and '70s. People were reading all sorts of things. And it was cool to read. Like reading was how you learned something. Reading provided a language that you could speak to someone else about. What did Phenom say? Did you read this? Did you read that? There was just so much reading that was going on. I mean, the Panthers published speeches. They funded themselves from royalties from their books. I mean, it's incredible. So there was a sense that people learned about the Vietnamese. They read about them. They exchanged information in ways that maybe it feels like, well, we can do this too in 2024 with just a click of our computer. But somehow I feel like the impetus to learn more, to learn from, to familiarize oneself with radical Palestinians and their vision for the future, Palestinian poets, Palestinian visionaries. Um, I feel like in the Vietnam era, there was more of that attempt that was there. It was made, I don't want to say easier, but I'm thinking about the role of bookstores. We
Yeah.
don't have the bookstores that we once had in our community. You could go down to and you could buy a pamphlet, a cheap pamphlet, cheaper than a book, just a dime or a quarter. Get Ho Chi Minh's speeches or
Yeah.
statements translated, and there you've got it. And yeah, it's great to think, okay, we can go online and Google and find this, but it's a different kind of, it's a more individual process than kind of the collective ways that information circulated around the U.S. war in Vietnam, and the way that people saw that it felt that it was important to make particular stands against it, despite the risk, right? Despite the risk. So I speak about in the forthcoming book project, which I'm working on now. I speak about people like General Baker, Detroit Radical, and him speaking back to his draft board, saying that he was not going to go to Vietnam because there was a war to be fought at home, um, as well as abroad in other places. And I feel like this is, to me, this is like just such a key intervention right now because there really are too many people who are sort of navel gazing into the morass of life in the United States as it is right now, right? And all of the challenges that forthcoming elections and, all of the, the political violence that makes you terrified when you just get in your car and drive somewhere, or when you just walk down the street and you're so worried about yourself, your family members, and all of that. People in the 60s faced that, and one of the ways that they addressed it was to look up and out. Um, Great story about when Charles Cobb, SNCC activist, and Julius Lester, SNCC activist, traveled to Hanoi for a delegation, and they saw some things that really transformed how they saw the war. It transformed how they saw themselves. They realized there's a great line in there where Charles Cobb talks about, they keep calling me American. I mean, in international parlance, right? He's American. He's got more than most in the context which he's in. He's carrying the American passport, the American privilege, but he knows that he's coming from Mississippi, where people have zero or very little, we can say, um, rights, um, power. It may feel
Yeah.
right. So just confronting that was so important to that generation of activists. And, yeah, us in 2024, we can just travel the world, right? But now, instead of traveling the world for education, political connection, things like that, there's more of a leisure,
Yeah.
even escapist, and I'm not going to say escapist, I'm going to say escapist and then escape.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah. Literally
the
escape.
sense of just
Yeah.
departing from this particular moment and going someplace else where one can have dignity and safety. But then what about the people there who don't have
Yeah.
dignity and safety too? And I feel like the 60s activists were able to bring together and hold and expose all of these contradictions. They didn't solve them for
Yeah.
sure, but tracing their paths through history, through how did someone who, one of the people I'm writing about, who eventually becomes one of the first soldiers to refuse orders, J.J. Johnson, talks about how his dad told him about the March on Washington and he didn't want to go.
Really.
He felt like that was not for him. He wanted to get along, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I love about my Vietnam book, it's really about how people move from consciousness to action. How does somebody like that, you know, decide I'm going to make a stand,
Yeah.
and I'm going to actually learn and read. He didn't even notice when Malcolm X was killed,
Yeah. Really.
right?
Oh, wow.
But he noticed afterwards, right? It all
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
together when he himself was drafted
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
found himself on the way to the front lines of another country with his life on the line and other people's lives in his hands. He took another path through community and through education. So I'm definitely going to be talking about the role of soldiers and the communities that they formed and the ways that they shared bootleg knowledges,
Okay.
came together collectively to say no to the war machine,
Yeah.
and all of the people who supported that. And of course, women, right? Women as mothers who came together, really seeing how the young men in their communities were being pulled out and shoveled to these front lines and spoke up and spoke out, using the authority that they held as women,
Yeah.
as mothers,
Yeah.
reaching out to Vietnamese women and mothers, right? So it's a really great story. It's a collective biography, and I hope to really bring together all of these strands so that people can really understand the threads of solidarity. Because I feel like it seems abstract now, like solidarity.
Yeah.
But have we learned more about Palestine in these last 8 months? Are we moving from news item to news item? Are we going deeper? Are we supporting Palestinian leadership that is radical? Like
Yeah.
what has changed, right?
Yeah. I
Those are
think.
deep questions.
Yeah. Yeah. True. I mean, I think one of the things that potentially, because if you think about when people protest and when people, it tends to be when they see violence. And well, I mean, in America, there's plenty of racial violence, which has sparked protests, right? But generally, we've moved into this kind of what I call the new age of empire, where like in the Congo, for example, it's terrible, but America's not in there with guns, so it's not as visceral. But then you see someone like Vietnam, or you see someone like Palestine, and you've got bombs, you've got kids dying. It just evokes a reaction, and does is that what radicalizes people? Even like Martin Luther King got radicalized by Vietnam, right? That makes it really unpopular. I guess is it the seeing that violence? Is that what kind of sparks that turn? Yeah.
Definitely. And I think also, I feel like learning about Palestine, like for me, it evokes like, a new language, a new lens to see the world. So you now start your thinking about settler colonialism.
Mm.
And now like you're unable to go to Puerto Rico with the same gusto
Yeah.
that you once did, or to Hawaii, right? Because now you're understanding that these places that are marketed as paradise
Mm.
are actually part of a settler colonial project. And we have to think about the ongoing nature and our ongoing buy in to the type of land grab and dispossession that we see happening in places like Palestine. And it opens, there's such an opening, I feel like, in this moment where it's not just about like, let's learn more about Palestine, but how do we tie into all the things we see happening in the world that don't make the news cycle? The
Yeah.
news is hungry to just feed us one little thing at a time, right? The other things are happening, but you have to go out of your way to find that out. So I was going to ask you, Kehinde, like, what is it like where you are? Like, what type of protests do you see happening? What type of repression of those protests do you see happening? What are the circumstances there?
Well, here it's similar, but not as pretty much in Europe and in the UK in particular. America's like the same but more extreme on
Mm-hmm.
pretty much everything. Actually, Palestine's a perfect example where we're having
Mm.
student protests, we're having mobilizations, but they're more muted, I would say.
Oh,
And the
okay.
backlash is very similar though. So the backlash, students are getting arrested. But again, it's very different with police in America coming onto campus with guns. Police in here don't carry guns, so it has a different. It's like
Right. Right.
it's similar but more muted in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
But that same, I think people are urging for that same international solidarity because you see it because it is so blatant, obvious, I guess. And I guess you're right. The question is, can we? What's next, right? Like it's the protest is great, but what's next? And I
Mm-hmm.
think similarly here, maybe the what next isn't as quite well articulated as
Mm-hmm.
the response, if you like.
Yeah, yeah. Because when I think of the '60s, I think about all the like the African decolonization and Palestine and Algeria and just the all of the things that were their current events, their the things that were being described in the front pages of newspapers, for people at that time. And it's actually helpful, I have to say, because these times are so very like it me feels almost like impossible times. Like how do you get through? How do you, the pain that you're carrying from even the unresolved thing, like there's so much,
Yeah,
so much that we are carrying, the names of the people shot down that we see, the images of the children, the bombs, the knowledge of the type of dispossession that's going on. It's really could be painful time. And I think about how people in the '60s and '70s, how they found a way, a purpose in the type of collective movement
mhm.
and struggle that they engaged in, all the while remaining connected, right?
Yeah,
That's the thing to think about, Malcolm X's father, to think about Panthers school children learning,
yeah,
to think about the music that they made, the poetry that they wrote, the ways that they kept the living even in the face of what felt like impossible odds.
yeah,
And so when you hear like, oh, Leonard Peltier, and you're thinking, oh my God, Leonard Peltier, how could this be that he's still in a cage?
yeah. I mean,
It
that is
gives
one of the
you
things of the Panthers.
gives you
Like,
a
it's
way
not.
to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with the Panthers. They're still a lot. Many of them are still locked
Hmm.
up. This history hasn't really finished.
Yeah.
Um, and it's yeah. And I think people have lost the revolutionary imagination. Right in the '60s, it seemed possible. Now it just kind of doesn't. So it's got yeah. There's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, anything
Um,
seems possible. I mean, I get like surprised and excited when I see people tossing around ideas like, "Oh, let's come together, let's rewrite the Constitution, why don't
yeah,
we?"
yeah,
Or let's think about what we're going to pay for housework, or we're going to, live together and share childcare so that we can remain politically active people. I mean, from the smallest, most
yeah, yeah.
granular effort to the most
To the
largest
largest. Yeah,
thing, it's really
yeah,
it really is a battery pack that can kind of keep you going, keep
yeah,
you
yeah.
moving
Definitely, definitely.
through these tough times.
Definitely. Yeah, as I was playing to my, I have to run around with my kids for basketball. So, but I didn't want to finish the interview without asking you about Patricia M. Robinson because I've seen that you're
Oh,
doing an archive collection. Um,
yes, Patricia
and
Murphy Robinson. She's important because, first of all, she was a Black psychotherapist who worked with people in many movements. So, one of the things that activists today will say, well, we're the self care generation. We are, the word trauma is being used to describe all of the different ways that the violence that we see and exist with are sort of residing in our world, in our bodies, in our lives. And so, the thing about Patricia Robinson, someone who was a therapist in the 60s and 70s and 80s and beyond, who worked with political people, who gave people a way to sort of process um, what they saw as personal problems, but instead to tie it to capitalism, to tie it to imperialism, to tie it to the family and its structures and how that's embedded in all sorts of inequality. So it's not just your husband is leaves those dishes and wants you to iron. It's that there's a whole structure that's socializing men in these ways that are destructive to them and to you. And she really gave people tools to try to navigate the world that they were in differently. She was also an organizer. She was part of a group called Black Women Enraged, who picketed draft stations and who advised young men against being drafted. She was also a supporter of the Latinx women's movement. She worked a lot with white radicals on the West Coast. She was based herself in New York, but she had a lot of impact, and she was a behind the scenes kind of person. She was not a person whose name you would know, but she's really one of the leading, I think, feminists and thinkers who really gave ordinary people Marxist language to help them understand what was happening around them. So I think oftentimes that the most radical thing we can do sometimes is to talk to the people around us, not the people who have, who are not going to accept what we have to say. And sometimes those are our family members, our neighbors, those
yeah,
kinds of things. And that's what she did. She politicized the people around her. She politicized in the larger political world where she knew James Boggs and William Worthy and, all of sort of the black radicals, you people like Yuri Kochiyama and others were part of her political network. But she also was one of those sort of bricklayers in local communities who was there for young people when they got arrested, who was there circulating the challenge and the liberator, who was there supporting people like Malcolm X and things like that. So I wanted to write about her because I think sometimes we don't have the evidence that this even happened. So
yeah.
it's an archival project. Like, this is all the stuff.
Mhm.
Here she is. She's getting, pamphlets from Cuba, and she's giving them to people in housing projects where she lives in New Rochelle, New York. She's getting all sorts of materials from the Congo, from Vietnam, from Venezuela, from all over the world, and she's moving it around. and she's following people as they become active in the Central American struggles, of the 80s and 90s. So she is part of that generation of long distance runners who continued to fan radical flames even during the winter of the Reagan administration and beyond, right? So I felt like um, there would be a place to talk about her because it goes beyond what self care has become
Yeah.
today, kind of commercial, kind of defanged, kind of, moderate. And the type of care that she was advocating that people took of their mental health, to me, feels revolutionary today.
Yeah. No, I'll be honest. Until I was researching for this podcast, I had never heard of Patricia Robinson, but it's fascinating. And
Yeah.
one of the things that was I have a book about Malcolm X coming out for next year. Malcolm's what would Malcolm say basically if he was alive?
Oh. Hmm.
And I was really intrigued. There was a bit in the Wikipedia page. Is it one of your students that made the Wikipedia page, or was
Yes,
I
yes,
following it?
yes.
I was following this correctly. And there's a line in there that says she was one of the people that tried to get Malcolm to lead the organization of Black Power. And I'd never heard of it. So this is why I thought I'd ask you after I got you on the podcast.
Yes.
I was asking you about this.
Yeah, she was there when he was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote about it. And the great other thing I want to say about her is that she was rich. She came from the Murphy family. They owned the Baltimore Afro. She was a light skinned black woman
Really?
with soft curly hair. She could have been living another whole other type of life.
Mm-hmm.
But she decided that her mission and purpose was to work with poor and working class people, especially women, and she was bold enough to go knock on people's doors in rooming houses and housing projects and talk to them about birth control, talk to them about their lives. And that became a group, that became a freedom school, that became a trip to Canada to meet Vietnamese women, that became so much, and really the springboard to so much impact and activism in her life.
Yeah, this is why this works are really, really important. So there's an Instagram page where you put in all the
Yes, at
archival
Pat
links.
Archives, PAT and Archives, at Pat Archives on Instagram. I put little things that I find in her home archives when I'm able to go there, just to have the evidence. Because sometimes we need to know, we need to actually see, because I think beyond the sort of fake news moment that we're in, but I also feel like when we see those things, we realize what is absent today for us. When you see that she was subscribed to and getting like over 60 international periodicals delivered to her home,
Wow.
and she was subscribing to all of this left press, her bookshelves are filled with all sorts of radical press. You ask yourself, wow, why is it today it just feels like such a now, like monopolization and repression
Yeah.
has stamped out so much information sources, so many sources of information that we used to have, even though today we're told, oh, we have more information than before. Oh, we can just click on our computers and find out the world. But I believe that in her generation, people sought out information with more intention and more collective discussion and propulsion than we have today.
Oh, you had to, right? It's too easy now. So you think you know when you really don't know. Like it just happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I would really say thank you for your work because this work is really important and it expands how we understand the past and how we go into the future. And I could talk to you all day, but I know you have to go,
Thank you.
and
And
I
then
have to go,
you
and I
gotta
have
go
to go
pick up the child. You can't let them be the last child. We know that.
exactly, or standing on the road just waiting, and they're young as well, so I really can't leave. Um, Thinking about parenthood and the movement, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
But is there a parting thought you'd like to end on?
But I want to thank you for your work, for everything that you're doing, where you are. I mean, I feel like I look at your books as a beacon. I think that you are really just holding up the light of scholarship and activism, where you are. And I think that's important because people don't realize how very difficult it is in the UK for Black scholars to have a voice, to survive what can be a very vicious and racist, academic environment. So I appreciate your longevity and your commitment as a long distance runner in
Yeah.
this struggle. And so I
Yeah.
thank you for your work and this podcast.
No, thank you. No, really. We'll get a big up all your work. We'll send all the links. And you said there's a new book you're working on.
Yes, I'm
When
working
would it?
on Vietnam Blues. I'm working on I don't know what I'm going to call the other one. Radical Therapist. I'm calling it
Okay.
now.
Oh,
Yeah.
perfect. Well, thank you again.
Thank you. Take care. Have a wonderful day.